Here is a summary of Surah 80 textual criticism. Muhammad outclasses Jesus. The Gospels and the Qur'an are two separate literary devices, metered in distinct languages and historicity. The expression of a contrasting narrative to be found in them is the least of expectations. Antithesis is one such literary technique where ideas in both devices are structured in parallel form but express opposing or contrasting meanings. The following finding of elements are an outcome of critically studying and contemplating the Surah 80. Muhammad introduces textual antithesis thoughtfully by criticizing the disregard shown to the seeker of faith and spiritual gifts of the account narrated in greater detail in the Gospel of Matthew. Then he deliberately creates a scene of his own engagement with a wealthy individual, a tribal leader in Mecca, in verses 5 and 6. While Jesus, in Matthew's account, verses 21 and 22, was casually drifting away in leisure. Despite his leisure, Jesus shows disinterest to engage with the Canaanite woman. Can you look at the level of detail? Not even a speck escapes from Muhammad's eye view and intelligence, and he capitalizes on every facet of the storyline in the Gospel account to shine his own hand. Muhammad clarifies that the Qur'an is for all in verse 11. Jesus, while insists that his ministry was restricted to the lost sheep of Israel in verse 24. Muhammad goes so far as to alter the gender of the seeker in verse 2, showcasing his diligence to address all elements found in the textual antithesis parallelism. The character Muhammad introduces is a male as opposed to a female in the Gospel account of Matthew, the Canaanite woman, who faces her toughest test at the table of Jesus. On the other hand, Muhammad is self-critical, correcting his behavior from the get-go as seen in verses 1 and 11, emphasizing ethical conduct while Jesus trespasses ethics by speaking to the woman undeservedly in a derogatory way. I don't particularly like the use of this word in the gospel here. Perhaps it was done intently by the scribes to show the authority of Jesus and of the Israelites over the unworthy Gentiles in the Judean context. On the other hand, Muhammad is inclusive of the unacquainted and self-critical. Muhammad in the early Makkah period, being socially woke, cut a masterpiece of an analogy of unchecked discrimination of the lowly against the elitism of the affluent class in verses 3 to 10. By making himself at the center of deserving criticism, while Jesus, even after being reminded by his disciples, ignores courteous conduct. Muhammad emphasizes the humble triad, seeking amendments, but is more gentler, courteous, and woke in his approach. While Jesus ultimately gets persuaded, but which comes with great difficulty for the poor woman. Whoa! This research, guys, already in its infancy has laudable outcomes. This antithesis literary model presented by Muhammad is a breakthrough discovery. The most salient element, that of a seeker's pitch, that models his outclassing Jesus' ethical conduct in his antithesis, has remained unknown for 14 centuries, guys. Interestingly, the person in Muhammad's story is the Arab cognate of a Gentile in the Judean context, who was unfamiliar to the tribes in Mecca. This literary work models the difference between the two accounts. It highlights the limitation and universality of Jesus and Muhammad's respective endeavors. Hats off to Muhammad, guys, for his heavenly contribution to the literature in the field of innovative scriptural writings. I'm sure that you're aware that in the Judeo-Christian theology, no one can outclass Jesus, because he bears the testimonial of John in the Judean context. And he goes on to outclass everyone else, which becomes problematic for him right away. On the flip side, In the Christian view, no prophet or a moral teacher could outclass him because Jesus transcends the category of a prophet altogether. However, folks, the point is that the Judeo-Christian ethical and eschatological frameworks were not universal. And therefore, we see Jesus' ministry was primarily to the lost sheep of Israel. And the apocalyptic end of the Second Temple era was concluded for none other than the Jewish people. In philological analysis, one could argue Muhammad's literary acumen to be uniquely effective, especially in comparison to how Jesus' message was conveyed. Muhammad's role was not only spiritual but also juridical, military, and political, whereas Jesus' mission was non-political in nature and only spiritual. And importantly, Muhammad's literary and political impact during his lifetime meant a universal and comprehensive framework endeavored by him. And hence, Muhammad outclasses Jesus. This effort of textual criticism is undoubtedly contributing to the development work laying foundations which has the potential to become a foolproof kit in the inventory of modern tools with which to peer open cracks in the seemingly impenetrable structure of the Qur'an. So like, subscribe, and share the challenge. See you in the next video.